Hey everybody, and welcome to the Rabbit Trail Podcast. You are listening to episode number 110.
110.
Yes, and we are excited these guys
right.
joining us together. Hey, we're going to get this down. So thank you for joining us, and we're just welcoming you to the show. If you're new, this is a podcast. We're going to chase the truth wherever it runs. And what we mean by that is really kind of take a topic that's been dealt with in the sermon here at Olive Branch Community Church, the sponsor of the podcast, and we're going to kind of see where it goes. And this week's topic was kind of interesting and fun, but we'll get into that in a minute. I want to welcome my co-host. Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Thank
Hi,
you.
guys.
Hi, guys.
My name's Stephen Oldham. I'm the local outreach coordinator here. And if you're listening on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and that you hit the ring. Someone click the bell if you want to be ringed a lot. Someone
We
actually
want
told
you
me
to prescribe.
One
and subscribe.
ringy dingy.
someone said
really?
that if I click the bell, I get everything. And so I was like, well, you don't have to click the bell, but the bell will remind you when the podcast pops up and everything else the church does. So just be aware that you'll get the rest of the things, and you'll know what sermon we're talking about finally, because that'll pop up on its own as well. Mm-hmm. But if you are, thank you for commenting, even the positive and negative. It's nice to see people commenting on the channel. That means you guys are talking.
Because some of them are listening to their cars right now.
Yeah.
Or in their earbuds on the run or whatever it is. Be sure to just go ahead and let us know that you're listening too. We'd love to hear from you.
What I'd like you to do, if you did write a comment and it's only like 7 words long, wait 3 weeks or 2 months, go back and read it and see if it makes sense to you.
Oh,
Why?
Because you won't remember the context you said it in. Because like sometimes we just shoot from the hip so fast, you don't remember, and you go back like, why did I say that? Like that's kind of how we read them sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm like, I don't know what part of the thing that you talked about triggered that response, and so you have to kind of look at the timing of it. When did it come in, and at what point, and what thing are you commenting on? Because I don't want to misascribe what people say to the wrong section.
Do you think that Christians who are filled with the Spirit of God will make less comments because they have self-control?
I don't know.
No, they'll make more because they're hungry to dive deeper into the Word of God and the knowledge
Well,
of Him.
we said question. That's questions. I'm talking about comments.
If you do, well, I don't know. I think people will.
Because you talk about comments like they're knee-jerk reactions, so I was just
Most of the time they are, but I don't mind that. I mean, sometimes a positive or affirming knee-jerk reaction, if it's true, is nice. I mean, you can knee-jerk react to something that didn't happen. You can be like, hey, you said this, and then you go back and go, well, that's not what was said.
Speaking of knee-jerks.
I want to clarify something. We're not saying if you make comments, you're not spiritual, because we want you to make comments. We just want to understand what your comments are
I was
saying.
just asking
I'm
a
curious.
theoretical question, so...
Yeah, no, I find I don't have a problem with comments. I think it's funny. Maybe I shouldn't, but like they don't get me down. They don't. I just you're responding to something.
Send even meaner ones then. All right, Brent,
Yes.
you got some comments here?
If you want to
Yes.
actually change your comment into a question,
And I will say
what would they
too,
do?
we were out to lunch the other day.
We're always out to
and
lunch.
Jacob, who produces this, really was reading some of the comments on one of the shorts that I did, and it was hysterical because people were like so angry. It would. I don't remember the context of why I said it, but we were talking about politics. I shared a funny story, and the whole purpose of sharing that story was that it was funny about my mother-in-law. And then people like took that very serious, like I am a staunch Republican, and Republicans are bad too. And trust me, people, don't get too serious about things like that, because it was really just there for humor. I wasn't trying to take a
If you're
political.
judging Brent's entire
Yes.
political theory on, what was it, 40 seconds of a funny story?
Yes.
Yeah, you don't know Brent that
And I've always no, it's not. You don't vote a party, you vote an issue or a person. So there you go. And my name is Brent. I'm the Connections Pastor here at Olive Branch Church. And I want to invite you to send us questions. We have one today that we're going to touch on at the end of the show. So stay tuned and listen to that. But you can send your questions to rabbittrail@obcc.church. And just a heads up,
obcc.church.
we're going through the contrast series. This series, the series topic that we're talking about today, that was preached last Sunday, is about family and
marriage,
the contrast
in particular.
in family and marriage, particularly, and in the roles of husbands and wives. What this coming week is going to be on unity. So
In the church
we are
particularly.
in 1 Peter. So it will still be in chapter 3, right?
No, it'll be the
so-
next section of chapter 3.
So if you want to read chapter 3, and we're going to be discussing unities, and something comes
That's
up,
verse 8.
send your
Chapter
questions
3,
in
verse
now
8.
so we can get on them next week as well. So you'll be
just
more
some
prepared.
context in case you're looking for it.
Yeah.
Hopefully this podcast meets you before the next time we're
So
recording.
after you divide over politics and men and women, we can come together in verse 8.
Come together.
All right. So I also want to just preface this moment by saying to everybody out there, number one, I apologize that I've been opening up with horrible jokes. They're just bad jokes, but they're meant to be bad. But on the other side, it's been great because people have been running up to me telling me horrible jokes. So Debbie met me in the hall and told me one, and I said, I'm going to share that on the podcast. So the joke is, a group of young horses started a church, but it was an occult. No, that was cute.
Oh, cute.
That was
I'll give it
cute.
cute. I'll give it
cute.
on a scale of 1 to 5 on cute, Stephen. What would you give that one?
I don't know. Probably at 3.
Okay.
It's always safe to go 3 in a scale from 1 to 5.
Okay, here's the deal. Here's the deal with bad jokes, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they're funny and people laugh, that's great. If they're not and people moan, that's great. You know, everything in between.
I just for my birthday. We went home after the sermon and everything, and I had just for the first time wanted to watch Ghostbusters Afterlife. Hadn't seen it yet, and I'd heard it was fairly decent. Look forward to the new one coming out in a week or so because I kind of liked Ghostbusters growing up. My kids were like, "These are okay," and I'm like, "Oh, so sad." But I thought the cinematography was really good. I thought that the plot line was kind of intriguing, and it was kind of it wasn't overly ghosty, like they were trying to be scary or whatever, but it was definitely one of those things that I enjoyed watching. And she, the girl in it, she tells just bad jokes for the whole movie. Mm-hmm. But wow, she delivers the bad jokes and you actually kind of laugh at them. It was pretty funny. I was like...
And you're just pointing out the fact that nobody's laughing at mine. What you're pointing
not
out.
us.
All right.
I think we should.
They are commenting on.
We should have one of those. Yeah, okay. We should have one of those events like all those YouTube channels do, where it's like, "Can you make me laugh?" And you just keep giving us a round of bad jokes until we finally crack.
So there's the challenge: send in a bad joke that will make people.
We will
laugh.
rate it. We'll rate it.
Clean bad joke.
We will rate, and the winner will get a prize when we do the live event.
What I mean by dirty jokes.
You may have to remind me, but the winner will get a prize.
Things that you'd be ashamed that your pastor is talking about. That kind of. Don't send those jokes.
We're talking about scabs, though.
One thing that struck me too, your computer made a ding noise just a moment ago, and it kills me every time I'm watching TV or I'm listening to something, and the show's phone goes off or something, and you think it's yours, and so you hear that noise, you're like, oh, and you're looking at your phone. So
something's happening. There's something going on.
Squirrel.
Yeah, trust me, I'm ADD. I'm scrolling all the time.
You are surrounded by it.
I am.
Right.
I'm surrounded by it.
Yes, you are, and you love every minute of it.
It wouldn't be a rabbit trail without us. It would just be a straight line.
Squirrel chasing is different from rabbit trailing.
So one of the things we'll start off that probably is controversial in this culture today. And it's been abused and taken out of context.
Is the entire passage we've been reading?
So this is 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1. Wives, submit to your husbands. That's what one passage says. Another one might say, wives, be subject to your husbands. Wives, respect your husbands. But wives, submit to your husbands is the one that probably gets the most pushback.
I don't know. I think subject is worse.
Subject
yourselves. It sounds worse to me. But
be subject to your own husband.
Right. Yeah. It's your own. It's not
all husbands.
So let me just say this. Okay, so that whole idea of women submitting to your husbands, culture looks at this negatively, but the scripture also tells men to serve your wives as Christ served the church, even be willing to lay down your life for her. Not only that, statistics show that men die before their wives. So we're actually living out that fulfillment of men lay down your lives for your wife. And do you think God planned it that way, that men live shorter so that when they die, women can finally do what they want to do and they don't have to submit or be subject to their husbands anymore?
You could just not get married.
I just,
Not have to worry
I
about
just
it
want to
all.
say this. I love to sit here and just say things that are, kind of borderline heretical, just to watch Greg wrestle with. Should I even give
bite?
This, give this any credence at all?
Dangling temptation in your face. It's like,
And I think for the YouTube thing, I think the camera was on me while I was saying that. But if you could have watched Greg just squirming in his seat, that's funny. Okay, so again, wives, submit to your husbands. It also says, husbands, serve your wives, lay down your life for her. And it kind of looks as though there is this picture of mutual submission going on in the relationship. How do we feel about mutual submission? And is that different, mutual submission, is that different than egalitarian? Or, and does it fit in with the complementarian position? And for those of you that don't know what those words mean, look it up.
No,
You Google it right now. Just pause.
Google it. No, we'll explain kind of what those mean, right? So first, I just kind of curious, like, what, just as like you said, it kind of looks like mutual submission. Like, where in 1 Peter do you see that?
See what?
The mutual concept of submission.
Part of, to me,
Like,
submission is putting yourself under or being in servitude to the other in one sense. So when it says husbands, serve your wives, you're kind of putting them, above you. And
Do you feed them grapes? Is that what that means?
Yeah, you feed
Fan them?
That's what it means in my house.
You're fanning your wife. Is that is that the picture you get though? I mean, like, what does the picture of service look like, I guess?
My wife explains this to me very clearly.
Go, Nancy.
I just went out to for coffee last week. Steve and I hooked up with James and we're talking to him, and he was asking me, "Does your wife listen to all these jokes on the radio, and what does she think of them?" I said, number one, she doesn't listen to the podcast very often, and she's pretty much heard them all after 40 years, so it would not surprise her.
And number 3, it's not a radio.
Yeah.
All right. So
that just shows how old I am.
First of all, there is a conversation out there about this concept of mutual submission, and I think what they're trying to get at is this idea that everybody's equal in Christ, right? There is a reality,
Jew nor Greek.
Yeah, that these
male or
ethnic
female.
identity markers, that these kinds of ways that used to divide humanity up are no longer to divide, right? And so that's very heavy from the book of Galatians, one text in particular, where it's talking about the boundary markers being dropped, and there's now, Christ we're all in Christ. And that's a tough section, and because it's not really talking about roles, it's literally talking about things like salvation. Like when you think about the ancient world, you got to remember they were even more, contrary to popular belief, they were even more divided than we are, right? In the sense of, like, if you were Jewish, you didn't want to talk to a pagan Gentile, and even the pagan Gentiles, they kind of didn't like, the Romans didn't like the Parthians didn't like the Romans, and the Greeks didn't care for the Romans, but so it was just kind of this whole, like, we don't like the others, and the Gauls and all that stuff. And you were defined by your tribal ancestry, not by skin color or anything else like that. And so there was this kind of tendency to not like somebody who's different than you. There's all racism and xenophobia throughout the Roman world. However, in Christ, I think what Paul was getting at is all that's gone. Like, you don't men are not more valuable than women, and Jews are not more valuable than Gentiles, and because there's circumcision's over. That was only for men. They're now men and women get baptized equally. We're heirs equally. That's what Peter will say later in chapter, in this chapter 3, verse 7. He's like, look, they're fellow heirs with you of the grace of life. There's no difference for the destiny of men and women. There's not a heaven for women and a special compartment there for men. And we are one family. And I like that idea of family, because when you think of your kids, right, who's more valuable, your son or your daughter? Like, no, that's not how that works. So I think that's what that Galatians passage is getting at. but then that seems to get imported a lot of times in these conversations into these words like the ESV translated likewise wives be subject, or submit to your, and it's this concept that but there's a mutual submission. Now I struggle with not with the
idea.
Yeah, not with the value behind the concept. Like I do think like if I was to tease out the difference, like I don't think the words are right. Because this is an oxymoron. Like mutually submit is this like, there's nobody to, like, submission requires somebody who's in the top order and somebody who's going to submit under that leadership. They're going to follow a leader. That's mutual following. I mean, that's literally how I hear the word. Like, we're all mutual followers. Like, Jesus mutually follows us as we follow him. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Somebody has to lead in order for there to be somebody who's going to follow. It's by definition necessary. And so there's this, and you can see it. Like, go back up the text with me. Go up to verse 18. It says, servants, be subject to your masters. Is that mutual subjection to your master? It's the same exact word in the Greek. There's no difference there. And so would we do that there? I don't think we would. I don't think Peter is kind of arguing for this being like there's not somebody you're supposed to listen to and follow and do what they.
Verse 13 says to be subject to every human authority. So you're supposed to say, well, there's really no authority.
And the authorities are subject to you because it's mutually subjective.
We're mutually, there's a difference between having a mutual responsibility for caring for one another and the fact that you erase particular responsibilities that we both hold. Like I want, when a cop pulls me over, I want him to treat me like a good citizen before he discovers whether I'm a bad citizen or not. And I want to, and he probably wants me to respect the fact that he's doing his job. And so we both have different responsibilities in that situation. And so, but I don't want to confuse that for thinking that I have his responsibility and he has mine. I think that would be confusing because you need police officers to do certain things that I don't have time to do or have the inclination or haven't been assigned that as a responsibility. So I think that there's a confusion that says that if I can't do something, if I don't have the responsibility for something, that somehow that means I'm incapable or less than human or less than some other human being who has that responsibility. That's not how I look at responsibility at all because of the time in the military. And I think that's what really did it for me, at least. When I'm looking at responsibilities in the military, there's an enlisted corps and an officer's corps. If you're talking about the value of each of the men, there's no difference in the value of each of these groups. To me, some of the most valuable people in the military are the ones that are lower in rank because of the responsibilities that they've been given are different than the ones on top. They all have different roles they play. But if you're asking who do I like or who do I think is a better person, that's a completely different thing. But if we didn't have these responsibilities in the military, it wouldn't function. It wouldn't be able to go anywhere, do anything, or accomplish anything. So we have to agree to these things. And so there's a mutual idea that if I join the enlisted ranks, I'm agreeing to this situation. I don't think I'm less than anybody else in the military or more in that sense.
So let me ask you a question. So if you have a commanding officer in the military and the president says to do one thing, your commanding officer says to do the other, who do you follow?
Probably the president. Yeah, most likely the president.
Because you're all
we're all under the president,
submitted to the president.
Yeah.
And if that's the case of what we mean
unless
by
it's
mutually submitted, right?
You're gonna get in trouble either way, by the way.
Right.
Yeah. You're going to the brink.
You're getting in trouble either way.
So my point is that if we're talking about mutual submission in the sense that we're all mutually submitted to Jesus, like that, I totally agree with. That makes sense to me in that terminology. Otherwise, it sounds like a quick preaching. Like I'm a preacher. Sometimes you find a turn of phrase that makes it. You put it out there, and you're like, oh yeah, that feels good, and that seems right. And then suddenly theology kind of grows around it, and sometimes it's not the best way to do it. And I'm not somebody who's, I'm not here to be like, this is hard because our culture has bad definitions. Like the definitions in our culture have gotten really power oriented. Let's put it that way, right? So when we hear the word submission, we think power play. We think, in fact, I would say it reads this way to most people: husbands, subject your wives. Like that's
to your authority.
Yeah, that's how we would read it. And it's like I tried hard in the message to like kind of unhinge that
Because that's not what the text says.
Because it's asking women to legitimately like honor and respect your husband by being willing to follow him. That's what that word subject or submit would mean, that you're going to follow his lead. And
yeah, well, this is a very American thing, by the way. I think part of the things that we
What are you talking about, American thing? The struggle with it?
I think the struggle with
it's a Western.
In a Western world, we struggle with having authority figures. We don't think of them as being valuable like other cultures do. Other cultures, if I were like when I was in the Air Force, they taught us how to negotiate with different cultures. And they said, be highly aware of the fact that you're American. And the reason why is because I went into a Japanese business room and I said, man, that young man over there, he's a go-getter. I'm actually dishonoring that man and everybody in the room because I'm supposed to acknowledge the authority. And then he can honor his own people. And I don't care about that. I don't care about that when I go in there and just disrupt the way they look at it. They think of the highest value being given to the person in charge, and they work for that person. That person can acknowledge them. But there's a way in which they look at authority being important to them because they feel covered, protected, or at least honoring the positions that they have. And when they get to that position, they expect to be honored in that fashion as well. So in our culture, we don't like that. We don't like the fact that someone could have the right to say something to us we don't like. So I think that's part of the problem is that we need to be aware of the fact that we have a perspective on authority that is uniquely American and Western in many ways.
Yeah, I think one of the things about this that gets difficult is that we can ask questions like, well, what does it mean then? Like, does this mean that a woman can't be a CEO? She can't be president of the United States? That she can't be the Queen of England, the Queen of England. That she can't. So what are we saying here? Because if she can't lead her own house, then
I think the problem I'm having is the fact that like oftentimes throughout history, people have expanded these roles to somehow be something about the value of the person. Or the ability of a person. Oftentimes there's kind of an inclination to kind of spiritualize these responsibilities and say that, because of you are being a man or because you're a woman, there's something innate in that. I don't know how you feel about that, but there are people who feel that way. I don't think I'm one of those.
Well, yeah, no, I think that the reason why we feel that way is because with authority in the fallen world comes kinds of a little bit of a value. Like I'm not a fan of what just happened in the last week. I'm like with certain commentators as it pertains to like the whole president coming out and speaking to Congress and everybody's
State of the Union.
Yeah, I do think it's monarchical. I do think it harkens back to.
You don't like the idea of the State of the Union?
No, I don't. Not in the way that it's done. Like to me, Congress is just as equal as the president, and so there's. In that sense, it's like we're overvaluing somebody in a way that's not intended. And that's because we've made this, he's the most powerful man in the world. Well, he's the most powerful man in the world that can't do anything because he's got a Congress or a Senate that doesn't want him to do anything. So who's really the most powerful? So it's like, I get it. And so we go, see, he's the most valuable person in the world because if he died, man, there wouldn't be any chain of command and all this stuff. Right. Okay, the position is a valuable position. The person is only as valuable then as the position is, and that is very different in the way that we think than what the Bible's getting at here. And that's what's hard about all this kind of stuff. It's like value is not changeable. It's not adjustable in the biblical understanding because we're made in the image of God, right? And so it's like, you can't make somebody more valuable or less valuable. And so you're supposed to honor the emperor just like everybody else.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. And I mean, as you were talking to the word submit or, people use the word roles. And again, you were using the language responsibilities. And the thing that I like about that too is, at the beginning of Peter chapter 3, likewise, wives be subject to your husbands, right? So submit to your husbands, wives. And then it goes into, just above that, 18 that you referenced, servants or slaves be subject to your masters. And it goes on to say, even if your masters are not good people, you should still, do your job, fulfill your responsibilities. And then it goes into, in chapter 3, even if your husbands are not good people, and I'm not saying if they're abusive, tolerate the abuse or anything like that, but even if your husbands are not Christ followers and they're not, making the best decisions, you should honor them as well. But I like the idea with the responsibility because here's the thing: whether it is a beneficial or a desirable situation or an undesirable situation, our responsibilities don't change. God doesn't let us off the hook of what we're to take responsibility for just because the circumstances bear it. And so I like that idea as well, that we're to be consistent. And first and foremost, we are submitting ourselves to God, and that is our responsibility first and foremost. And then these other ones come underneath that.
Yeah, I think I didn't make that up. I got that from a woman named Katie McCoy, who is she's a professor now I think she's at Dallas Theological Seminary now. She teaches women's studies at the seminary, and it was her concept. I heard her on a podcast where she's like, she doesn't like the term roles because roles imply social construct. They imply a lot of pieces in our current culture that come out of a responsibility, and roles can be like chosen. You can pick up a role, you can change roles. A responsibility is given, and it's given to you by an authority. And so unfortunately for us as Christians, or fortunately, depending on what position you're viewing it from, we have been given responsibilities, and we, like you said, we don't get a choice. And I like that she brings it out away from role conversation into responsibility conversation, because the way she's saying it's like, you're going to stand before God for what you are responsible for. Right. And those responsibilities were given different to men than they were in marriage than they were to women in marriage. And again, this is in marriage. This can expand into the church in that sense, in these conversations. But in marriage, it's particularly that's how the Bible always frames it. And I think that's important because we can get into this conversation about egalitarian and complementarian. And just really quick, so everybody's up on the language. An egalitarian is someone who is going to claim and state that the Bible teaches that through Christ, all roles in the church are available to to males and females to equally. So that is
responsibilities are interchangeable.
No. Roles. They don't use terms. The responsibility is not a term that they actually have started to struggle over this change of the terminology, because again, you have to argue that God didn't give us that responsibility, or he gave that responsibility to everybody, and that's really hard to look at and find, because responsibility is not about value. Responsibility is just simply about being given a responsibility. Let me put it this way. I have 4 children, and sometimes I give one a responsibility, and it's his job. Now, why did I choose one son to do the recycling? And that's his responsibility, and another son to do the trash. It had nothing to do with how valuable they were, even the fact that whether they could carry the trash or not. That was a responsibility we gave them. One's not more valuable than the other because I gave them that responsibility. And they don't get to come to me and say, well, I took out the recycling, so he needs to take out the trash. Well, that's not your responsibility. Doesn't matter what you want to take as your responsibility. Responsibility is given to you by the one who is allowed to give it, namely God. And so I'm not saying I'm God. I'm saying that, namely, God gives us responsibility. And that's a very different approach. So egalitarians, though, in this concept, again, very simply say, all roles in the church and in marriage are open for men or women to take. They can be everybody from the senior pastor down. Nothing's barred. It doesn't matter. Women can lead and men can lead. That's where this mutual submission conversation comes in, where they're like, nope, they're just kind of leading together and following together. It's kind of this like, but nobody's really leading and nobody's really following is kind of how it gets confusing.
Following the follower, following the follower.
So then complementarianism is a big word, but it means that men and women are made to complement one another. Now, the problem complementarians begin to fall into is that they are not a singular idea like egalitarian. I haven't heard that there's different egalitarian positions. Stephen, have you? I just know that there is.
Yeah, there's egalitarians that believe it or not, there are egalitarians that believe that men could be in charge of the family but not in charge of the church. And so I don't know many of those, but like you would, as opposed to like the church is open to do whatever they want, but families need to be run by men. They'll make that argument, or vice versa. But that's not very common. Usually, if you believe in complementarian, you're going to believe
they're egalitarians.
Yeah, if you're going to be an egalitarian, typically you believe it's equal in the church and equal in the family.
So yeah, and so but in complementarianism there is like a broad range,
equal responsibilities is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and so if you look at the range, egalitarian can move into what we would call just kind of feminism, to where it gets really kind of like extreme on certain edges. Then they would say that's not us, right? And I'm not going to say that that's them. That's not my aim to pigeonhole.
No, there's a spectrum. Right.
But on the other side, complementarians do have a very large spectrum before you hit what we would call chauvinism or even patriarchy in that sense. And that's because of and while it sounds patriarchal, right, I think complementarianism just basically says that men and women have different roles. Now they're starting to see different responsibilities that have given to them by God, where the husband is supposed to lead the family, and men are given the top leadership positions at a church, and women the wife is to follow her own husband. I'm not saying anything about children and that stuff, and that women can, then this is where it starts to spread out very differently, have different various roles. Now, at the broadest complementarian position, meaning kind of the one that's the most open, is that the only position in a church that would be that God has not given that responsibility to for women is the role of like elder or senior pastor, something like that. You can still see that in the remnants of the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church and a lot of Baptist and kind of conservative churches. But then there are some roles that go even further, some complementarian positions that kind of say, no, they can't take any title like the word pastor. They can't even preach. They're not allowed to teach anybody. They can only be in the children's ministry and the women's ministry. And then some go even further. They can't even teach in those cases, only in their homes, not amongst. And so it gets really restrictive to where it does become what we would consider like a patriarchal. Only men are doing everything, and women have to do what the men tell them to do. And that is, I would say, I don't know too many complementarians that would say, yeah, that's us. That's a pretty rare breed of complementarian. So there's your definitions for all it's worth.
My question, since you're both married, is what does this look like for you guys in your particular relationships?
Mutual submission.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
How does this look? I mean, like you guys you're both men, you're both fathers, you're both husbands. So take it out of the abstract. Tell me, what does that look like in your marriage? And not that you have to speak for your wives, but like, what do you think they would say as well? I guess that's what my questions for each of you. What does it look like? And are they okay with it? Or they're like, I don't like these scriptures, or what are their various thoughts?
Personally, if you and this is not to disparage my relationship, because I think that Nancy and I have a fantastic relationship. But I do believe that at the fall, relationships were cursed. So there is a tension there where I know Nancy understands the idea of submission and headship and responsibilities. And I do feel as though there are times that there is conflict in trying to live out those roles, properly. So for the most part, I think we try to do well, and we try to respect each other and value each other. But there are times when we don't do it well, and so that's the way it goes at my house sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm just asking because, like, if I came into a church and people were like, okay, the man's in charge. Well, in my world, in America, no one's in charge of someone else. This feels very patriarchal. But then I want to be a Christian, and so I get to a passage like this, and I don't quite know what it looks like in a healthy situation, or am I? So there's some fear there.
So I want to get there. So like I want to get there, and I'm going to walk us through how we work on this in premarital counseling.
Yeah, I kind of.
And then I want to talk about how me and Teresa have addressed it. And it starts off really back here at the fall with Adam and Eve. And when Eve, what's weird is Eve is given her punishment, her consequences first. The curse comes to her, and the curse, it actually hits the sphere that women are most powerful in, and that's in the family unit. Like I'm telling you, I don't care who you are, moms are powerful. Like they're just powerful. Whether the dad thinks he's powerful or not, moms are powerful because they're with the babies, they're with the kiddos, they're the ones pouring in, at least in the ancient world. Like modern times, totally different conversations. But in that time period, you got to remember, it says of the woman, I will surely multiply your pain and childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. And then this is verse 16 of chapter 3. It says, your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. And the picture, my professor who did this for his doctoral dissertation argues, because it will show up in that same exact language, parallels right when God turns to Cain and tells him, you will, that this one is at your door, and
sin is at your door.
His desire is to rule you, and you need to rule it. Like there's a power struggle that is determined in this text, a power struggle that was never intended. I mean, Adam and Eve, yes, he named his wife. Yes, he was given the instructions by God. He was given the responsibility to lead her, and he failed. He absolutely failed. He didn't lead her at all. He didn't stop the spiritual darkness from dealing with her, or he didn't help her. He stood there passively by and watched the whole thing unload. That's why Adam is the one who's said to have brought the fall onto humanity, not Eve. So
because he was the one that was instructed, right?
Yeah, he's responsible.
The first instructed.
And that's before the fall. He was still responsible.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when we see this, though, there's suddenly a new tension. It was never intended for this to be a rule, like a domineering rule, and I'm not going to go with you. And that's the picture that's being painted there, is that you have this person who doesn't want to listen and doesn't want to follow and going to want it their way all the time. And then there's this one who's going to say, no, I want my way. I'm going to make you do it. And unfortunately, men have the power and the strength to do so. And so history unfolds in a bad patriarchal way. I do think there is bad patriarchy throughout history.
Well, you just keep reading in the text. You'll find out real quick.
You'll find out real fast. And it is men dominating by their power and their strength women because...
And it's not looked at as a good thing.
No, it's not.
And I look at it too, like for men, you're responsible for your family and leading your family. And the way I view that really is, you know where your path is supposed to lead, right? And so it's my job as the head of the household, the one who's responsible, to make sure we don't veer off of that path, you know. And I don't exclude Nancy from the decisions of where that path is going to lead. I mean, obviously, when it comes to spiritual matters, the Bible has clearly laid all of that out. But when it comes to decisions for us as a family, how do we want to, operate? What kinds of things do we want to do, and how do we want our family to look and our finances to look? Those are mutual decisions. But if her desire takes us off the track, it's my job to keep us on the track, if that makes sense. And really, I think when you really look at what marriage should be outside of the fall, really, if me and Nancy, she's the most important person in my life. She is the one I love more than anybody on this planet, really. And hopefully she feels the same way about me. Maybe not after she hears all the jokes, but the idea that I truly want what's best for her, and I want what's best for us as a family. And if she feels the same way, and she always has my back, and she always has my best interest at heart, and I have hers, how could this not be the greatest thing that was ever created? That the most important person in your life is so aligned with you and so willing to sacrifice for what is best for you and the family. And if you're both treating each other with that kind of care and honor and respect, how could this not be a great thing?
So, yeah, and I I totally agree. I think that in my house, if you wanted a practical illustration. What early on in our marriage, just be quite honest, I struggle, and I've always struggled with abdicating leadership. And what I mean by that is like literally like, you make the decision. I don't care. You know?
Like Adam?
Yeah, very much. So I think that I fall onto the danger side for some men, which is not aggression and overkill. It's passivity and like no leading at all. And that has been our primary struggle. I mean, it has been a very deep-seated pain that Teresa has had to face because she likes male leadership. She is a small woman, and she has said many, many times to me, like, I don't understand. I want a man to protect me. I believe that you guys are way stronger. You're way more capable of aggression. And look, if somebody's attacking me, great. I could have a gun. I could have all that stuff. There's nothing like a dude who's going to be there, taking that person down. Like, to her, it makes sense. She's had very strong examples of that kind of stuff around. And for me to be passive and to kind of just like not make decisions, was making decisions, would drive her crazy. So early on, I fell into that very passive mode. And she was struggling. Like she had to, like she literally, we would get in fights, and we would get in fights over the, I was joking, like, I think that it was legitimately like she never liked wearing shoes, and she was pregnant at the time. She was working in the kitchen and cooking and stuff, and I'm like, and I'm laying there like all this like this lazy lop and she just like angry turns and just like, why don't you help me out? And we got in probably one of the biggest fights we'd ever gotten to early on, and that kind of. I fought back. It was all about cleanliness and the house and order and stuff. My thoughts were like, well, you can't relax in the midst of a mess, and you just can't. And our things were always like, we would always end up like turning it into some spiritual fight because we're, to where it's
cleanliness
like you're
is next
lazy.
to godliness.
Well, no,
no, that's
like,
not in the Bible.
Yeah, yeah. So like I would be like, she's like, you're lazy, and I'd be like, well, you're anxious, and you're trying to control your anxiety by not trusting the Lord and keeping your house in order, and that gives you. And she's like, no, that's ridiculous. You just don't care, and you're not willing to make it. And the problem was we were both right. Like we legitimately were both pointing out flaws, but we weren't, capable of really convicting each other over it. And it wasn't until God convicted us that we were like, oh, okay, Lord, yeah, we need to change and we need to grow there. And one of the things that shifted in my life was reading Ephesians chapter 5 and seeing that even here, as Peter puts it, he says, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. Like, I wasn't seeking like to understand her needs. I wasn't seeking to understand what she wanted. And if I had, I wasn't actively seeking it out. It's one thing to understand, but I wasn't leading. And I wasn't, as it would say in Ephesians, living out, giving myself away, serving her. So it's not so much that, I'd be willing to die for my wife. Of course I would. I think most people are willing to die for, most men I know are willing to die for the women in their lives. I really do think, I don't know too many guys. I mean, I know you die for your mom,
Sure.
your sister, we die for our same things, right? And it had to be reframed to me that, no, Jesus didn't just die for the church. He served the church to death. Yeah. And that's how we are called to serve. And so that's
easy to lay down your life. You only have to do that once.
Right.
To live for them, you have to do that every day.
Yeah. And so suddenly that shifted in my mind to where I was like, oh, I'm here as Jesus said, you want to be the leader, be the servant of all. Once those two things started kind of trickling into my headspace, it was like, no, a leader, and this is how I understand leadership, leaders go first. And I really do think that I like the idea that we keep each other on the path, but leaders go first. And so on one side, a leader is somebody who's willing to go take the suffering first. So am I willing to get up in the middle of the night and go check out the house and not make her go do it, right? Am I willing to grab that dish and those dishes and start cleaning them? And am I willing to notice if I'm not really good at noticing when the house is dirty and stuff? I grew up, my house is immaculate to me, and she's like, this place is dirty. And we're like, we see things totally differently. But it's like I'm learning because I want to see through her eyes to serve her and help her. And so I think that's an aspect of leadership as it shows up in our house, is that I want to go first. I want to initiate, I want to engage. And I still struggle at being the more passive because she's just faster at seeing things. She's faster at coming to the conclusions. She's faster at sometimes realizing what's going on. And so I'm kind of late to the party, or I'm too busy thinking about church, these kinds of things. So
and I just kind of want to say things too, and this has nothing to do with what you just shared. Okay, this has nothing to do with what you just shared in that regard. But when it comes to passivity in men, right? And again, it's not. I don't want it to be conflated with what you just shared.
It's okay.
No,
You can say
but when
it.
it comes to passivity in men, I think men have become more passive. And I did hear a quote one time that stuck with me and kind of affected me. But it said that a man's fear of failure far exceeds his desire for success. So if a man feels as though he can't be successful, he will stop trying, because if I don't try, I can't fail. So the fear of failure is greater than the desire for success. So again, for the women out there, don't be overly critical. You do need to be that cheerleader and that encourager of your husband, because if he steps out and tries to do things and tries to lead and he keeps getting his hand slapped and told he's doing it wrong, he will quit trying, and then become overly passive. And I will say that sometimes that's what women want. They want to be in control. And I know this, not everybody, but I know this because I've heard on more than one occasion women telling their husbands that they need to be the leader of the house. They need to be the spiritual leader of the house. And this is how you lead our family spiritually. You need to do and so it's like, you don't want a leader, you want a puppet, and if he's not leading the way you think he should lead, then you criticize and condemn his leadership. And then men withdraw and quit trying. On the flip side, I've talked to many men who a lot of times the women are more involved in the church. They're more involved and engaged in Bible studies, and they've been coming, and their husbands feel inadequate spiritually or knowledgeably a lot of times. And as they're coming, as they're kind of, coming to Christ and trying to grow in their Christ, they feel inadequate as leaders. And so to you men, I just want to challenge you and just say, start leading. You don't have to know more to be the leader. Greg doesn't have to know more than every employee about what their position is in order to lead the staff properly. He sets the vision and maintains that, sets goals, and let's all march forward together. So again, don't be afraid to lead, and don't use that as an excuse, because I came across a statistic years ago when I was doing premarital counseling, and one of the things I came across was that if the woman is the one who is, a mature Christian, going to church all the time, in Bible study and everything else, the statistics are kind of like 15 to 20% of those children will grow up to have a meaningful relationship with God. But if the husband is the one who is a committed Christ follower, mature in his faith, and reading the Bible and praying with his family and doing those disciplines as well, it's like 30 to 40% of those children will grow up to have a real relationship with Christ. So the question to you guys:
what happens when they both?
Yeah. I don't know. I didn't.
It's
see
actually
that.
really, really
But,
high.
Yeah. But again, a challenge to you guys. You are the spiritual leaders of your family. The question is, where are you leading your family spiritually? Because I guarantee you, if your wife is taking the kids to church when they're little and you're staying home and not engaged, when your kids start getting teenagers, they will most likely abandon the faith and follow where you've led them. So challenge to both of you guys to take on your responsibilities seriously, encourage one another, serve one another, and do what the Bible has commissioned both of us to do.
All right, Stephen, you were going to say something. Where were we?
Can I get an amen?
Well, you guys
funny,
talked
man,
a lot
got
about.
serious.
I think there's mutual service, is what it sounds like. Your wife would serve you, and you serve your wife. So, what is the actual part that you get to say because you're the leader in the relationship? When does that become a thing, and why is it important to have this structure at all?
I don't think it starts with a saying. I think it starts with a snapping of your fingers, right? When you give that look and you go, they know.
That's the one that she gives you?
Oh, now I just ruined everything I've said.
Yeah, you just did. Yeah, you just blew it up. The actually, that's why I think people get confused that it looks like mutual submission. In fact, in Nancy Pearcey's book, The War on Toxic Masculinity, or The Toxic War on Masculinity is how she put it, is she points out that when you dive into the people, and this is early on, chapter 1, chapter 2, she's like, when you begin to interview men and women and you ask them, who do you think should be, who leads the family? They all are like, oh yeah, the husband leads the family. The husband leads the family. And then they talk to them, and how does that work out? And it always looks like what egalitarians would call mutual submission. And that's because they would all say, well, no, it's when there's a serious question in the end, if we can't get it right, he has to make the decision. I just have to kind of live with that. But what's funny is that most men won't make that decision unless, and there's some men who are just going to be like, I'm going to make the decision and we're doing it my way. And there's some men who are like, well, I'm going to make the decision that's going to be best for you, and I'm going to suffer. And I do think that the question for a good marriage is, are you willing to make the decision in which you will suffer for the sake of your spouse? I think that's where the leadership comes in. Men are not supposed to leave. Their responsibility is not supposed to make their wife make a decision so they have to suffer. Our job is to suffer so that our wives do not have to suffer. And we should be the ones who carry this.
If there's going to be suffering, you should be the first to do it.
Yes. And I will say to that is not letting your wife have her way every time. That is, are you willing to suffer for her? Because here's the thing, when her getting her way goes against what you guys have designed as a family and the path that you're intended to follow,
or Christ, sin,
it goes askew, then that's when you don't. That's when you say, no, this is the way we're going. But if it's like, what kind of car, what color car, then let go of what you want and let her have what she wants,
I mean, this is an example in my house. Like, I think I've made the decision basically to say, I don't have a man cave. I don't need a man cave. In our house, my wife is extremely good at making our house look amazing. Why in the world would I touch that? We kind of mutually submitted to each other, so it's a hodgepodge of just mishmash nastiness, right? It would not look good. But by allowing her to do what she's good at, by allowing her to she loves beauty, and allowing her to bring beauty into our home, she's sometimes just like, I'm sorry, the house is so girly. And I'm like, no, it's beautiful. And for me, I'm a pretty flexible person in general. And so, but for me, it was like the ability to just go like, why would I keep you back from doing what you're good at? Why would I keep you back from enjoying? I mean, I've got an office, and look, my office is a mess. My office is a pretty kind of dark, dank, kind of not the prettiest place on the planet, right? My house is beautiful, and it's got tons of books and all this cool stuff and things that I love. But she's the one who's there because she homeschools her kids, and not saying that she can't go get a job or anything. This amazing woman, she can figure something out when she wants to finally go do it. But this is what she wants to do, and I love that our house it looks the way that it does, and that I can facilitate that, because to me that's a labor of love. I want to do it out of love for her. I want to do it out, and then when I'm doing that, she gives me the most respect. And suddenly that whole who's going to be in charge, it becomes this race for who's going to serve and love the other. And so there's this beauty in it that suddenly you look like Christ. But I do think that male leadership comes down to, if one of the two of you is going to have to suffer for a decision, the man should make the decision to suffer every single time. I just don't think that is, that should be given to the woman if you're in a marriage situation. I just think that's contrary to true masculinity at that point.
And if you're having problems in your marriage and somebody needs to start treating the other one with more value and more respect and honoring them, it should be the men first.
Yes.
And I've heard that oftentimes where you're talking to a couple and they're like, why should I be the one? Well, you want it. You should be the one. And it starts with the man. So.
And it's interesting in my house, and I this is anecdotal, so granted. I like my kids. I think they're rad. I enjoy my kids. We sit around at tables. At dinner time, we do rabbit trails at my own house, at dinner with my kids. And I just love it. And but the funny thing is, Teresa can tell them to do something, and she'll be on them, and they'll do it. And then it drives her crazy. She's like, I need you to just go tell them to do it. And I'll go over there and tell them, and they're like, okay. I'm just like, oh my gosh. But there is a weird reality in that as well. That just kind of, it's like, mom's with us all the time. You take for granted the one who's with us, and then in comes dad, and they know I don't know what they think I'm going to do to them, but then they just get up and get going.
I will say that too, that used to happen to me. I used to work restaurants, so I'd work 13 hours a day. And I was not the type of dad that spanked my kids a lot or really disciplined them a lot. But I think they knew that when I said something, I meant it, right? And Nancy used to call me up all the time at work, and she'd like, the kids are misbehaving. Will you tell them? And from the phone, from 45 minutes away, I'd go, stop that. Okay, and it's like, and it drove her crazy. Why? And it's like, God intended it that way. So.
Well, they do a lot of studies on children, and especially boys. They need a male voice, and they respond to it. Part of that is because the one that you hear that's encouraging and loving and supporting and making your clothes get in order those are the ones that are with you all day long. The other voice is the one that you're like, what is this voice for? And it's different, and it's telling you, listen to that other voice. Right. For some reason, young kids, especially boys, respond to that, and they're thinking that might be the problem when there is no father in the home, why it's so difficult for a single mom sometimes to do that. The opposite is true for a man who doesn't have a wife. Typically, he has to work really hard to be the one to be nurturing and kind, and it's easier to have like an aunt or someone else do certain things that are hard to do. So
I do think that God was pretty smart in the way that he set the responsibilities up. And I've mentioned this kind of stuff before. And me and Tress kind of go back and forth about this. Sometimes we agree and sometimes we disagree, probably because the way I frame it. But I have a tendency to believe that if you leave a man with no responsibilities to lead, they wind up being boys. And the relationship that men have with their wife when they don't have the responsibility of leadership is the relationship of a child to mom. Versus, and then there's resentment that will build depending on who you are, and you'll fall into aggression or passivity, and that's always dangerous. And I believe that the wife is related to their mom in such a manner, and related to the nurturing and the caring, that when they lead, when they step into leadership, it is all about the care and protection and carefulness, and you need to, and it takes at that point, it causes them to fall into what is a natural state, but not. There's no balance to the way that leadership is going to come through. I think that feminine leadership is always present, and it's present from the child in utero all the way through until that mom is no longer the one of the family. And so women have a natural inline leadership as in family. Period. And so leave it alone, and you don't end up with men. You end up with something that you don't want. And I just do think that there's some reality in why God gave the responsibilities the way that he did, to kind of call us out. So,
all right. Well, we have one question. We'll get to this real quick. It was a question sent in by Nick, our youth director. He was out to lunch with somebody, and they brought this up and thought, that's interesting. I'm going to text this to the or email it to the rabbit trail. And it's this. So here you go, Nick. His question is, will we still read the Bible in heaven? So, Nick, the first thought that came to my mind when I read this question was, what do you mean still?
Depends on what the definition of is. What?
What does he mean still read the Bible? Like, he doesn't read the Bible.
Oh, gosh.
Sorry. See, my jokes are just like tanking.
Oh.
So, all right. Will we still read the Bible in heaven? Matthew 24, 35 says that his words will, I don't even, now I just got
Not return void?
Yeah, no, it will never
Pass away.
pass away. You know? So is that his words, or is
Heaven and
that
earth may pass
the
away, but my
word,
words will never pass away, right?
So will we read the Bible in heaven?
I mean, we have a youth director here. We should ask him. I'm just kidding.
I mean, part of me, when I think of this, is kind of, you guys are readers, so you probably think of heaven as being a library full of theology books. But the one part of me is like, if I went to the Grand Canyon, I wouldn't want to look at a picture of the Grand Canyon. You know, I wouldn't be focused on a picture of the Grand Canyon. I would be focused on the Grand Canyon.
Right.
When I'm in heaven, standing before God, and I don't feel like I would have the necessity to read the Bible. I would know Him, and I would absolutely know who I am before Him. And
I want to argue that if the scars of Jesus as memorial scars are on his resurrected body, why would we not have the memorial story still be the greatest story?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we may not read it as the way that we would no longer read it for the sake of like how we should live and all these things, but there's a memorialization in the text. I mean, at least don't you think we would be singing the Psalms? So those would be read. At least don't you think we would be celebrating the wisdom of God and how intricate and how amazing it is? I think there's wisdom in the text that is still there that we would learn from even after the resurrection. And so are you going to read it in heaven? Let's just put it this way. Like, I don't know if there's a Bible in heaven, like where we're, right now,
because like what I was thinking too.
But after
if there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth and everything's going to pass away, and somebody in heaven is going to sit there and write the whole Bible out again, so we could read it. That was like one of the things I pictured in my head, and this is just because I'm a warped human being.
Stephen, please help us out here.
Well, for me, I don't think all things are going to pass away means that books are going to burn up and things aren't going to be there that are here. I think, especially from reading some of Randy Alcorn's book, I think things will survive in the new earth and a new heaven. I think new books will be written. But I think of the Bible, even if you have Christ, in heaven, in the new heaven, you still don't you ever read a card that was sent to you by someone that you love and care about? Be like, well, I'm never going to read the birthday card that you sent me or the nice words. I'm just going to talk to you. So typically, you would remember things that you thought had value here on earth. And so it might have a different take than it does. But also, I do think that we're going to want to read because we're going to want to remember what these passages were. We spent so much time with them. I think they'll be fond. And then when you see them played out, you'll be able to do that as well. So I don't
From
think,
a nostalgia standpoint, are you
not
saying?
just nostalgia. I think there are things. I don't think when you get to heaven, you know everything. I think when you get to
no, you don't.
You don't.
That's what I was counting on.
Yeah,
That's why I'm not
God.
studying now.
There's still going to be a lot to learn when you're there. It's just the sin nature that we have will be removed. And so there's still going to be people writing books and learning. You can still learn to play music and do these things. You're not given everything right when you walk in the door and be like, everything. And now what?
Gosh,
I even
whole
think
perception is shattered.
Sure it is. I think that even that God will play coy on some things. I think that he wants us to engage the mysteries. And so he's not going to just I think, oh God, okay. So how'd you work it out with your will and our will? And I don't think he's going to be like,
bring your Calvinist friend up with Jesus.
Well, let's talk through this because you guys were wrong. You got this one dude over here. He was right. No, I think he's going to be like, well, let's have some conversations about it. That's I think he's going to keep doing mind bombs on us because it grows the human being. There's actually, and people forget, there's intellectual virtue. There's legitimately virtues and character of your mind being transformed, of thinking a certain way. That has to be trained. That just doesn't happen. And so
you don't lose curiosity in heaven.
Yeah. And I think that all of this, I think the scriptures are laden with information that look how many books we've written in the last 2,000 years. I mean, 1,500 years, but even 2,000 years and more. I mean, we've got Targums and all, I mean, tons of information, and we're still mining stuff out of the scriptures. We're still pulling things out that we never noticed before, that we didn't realize. Like why wouldn't we expect that? Like, hey, I get to sit across from Athanasius, and we actually get to talk about the Bible, and he's doing it in Greek, and over here's a Japanese theologian, and over here's an Indonesian family that never had a chance to do theology, but they come from their cultural background with such an information that God's like
Teeny shared the gospel with. Right,
but they come with a different cultural milieu on the scriptures, and suddenly we're like, we never saw it that way, and God's like, It's going to, I sometimes believe that it's going to take all the nations to really show us the wonder and the depth of what was in this book.
If you could spend a lifetime reading it now, I don't think that's going to change much when you have it in the new heaven and new earth. You're still going to explore new things you didn't know about God.
And Jesus,
you're going to want to talk to people about them, and you're going to want to share them.
He's going to be teaching. I'm sure he's going to have some Zoom classes and stuff.
Now, the evangelists are going to have a hard time in heaven.
Yeah, that you're not going to be doing.
That's not going to happen anymore.
We're done with. They're going to become worship leaders, but I don't see why there would be why there would be a reason we wouldn't read the scriptures. Now, I'll just bring this up just for fun. And so let's read the couple of scriptures here. It says, this is Matthew chapter 5, verse 18. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter or one stroke of the letter will pass from the law until all takes place. So that's the Lexham version. The NET puts it, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke of a letter will pass away from the law until everything takes place. So, okay, does that mean after that, it will pass away? Like those things will go away? Probably not what it means. Jesus is obviously implying that the word's not going to fall apart and cease until it's fulfilled. Because even later, Luke's going to kind of say something similar. He's going to say, but it's easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one stroke of a letter of the law to become invalid, right? That's like, So it doesn't seem to imply that the Bible's going to disappear with the heaven and the earth. It's just that it's going to be fully fulfilled.
Yeah, you're going to be in the fullness of it. So, doesn't mean you understand what's going on just because you're in the fullness of it either.
I mean, I'll be really disappointed if we don't get to sit down in the new heavens and the new earth and open the book of Revelation and finally go, that's how it worked.
Okay.
Holy cow. Like,
now
that would be
I get
so
it.
horrible. Like, you're just like, yeah, we threw that away. There's so much to learn still. Like, what?
That's funny.
I mean, like, that would be pretty disappointing.
Well, it goes like when you're reading a good book and you love it, you get to the end, you're like, oh, I think I missed some things. I want to go back and read some of the things I didn't see the first time.
Like
even
when
though
I saw the movie The Sixth Sense the first time. And it was like, as soon as it was over, it was like, I got to watch that movie
He touched
again.
him at this point. And it's like, nope.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, that's it. Well, thank you guys. I hope that this has been an interesting conversation, and maybe it's provoked some questions for you in your marriage, or maybe it's provoked some questions as women that maybe you'd love to ask, and you say, well, I only want Teresa to answer this, or we need a female guest or something to answer.
Or how sexist you guys are.
Yeah.
Just say, I think you guys are sexist.
Whatever. You feel free to let us know. And
why you think that in the form of a question.
Yeah. Feel free to send us your questions, your suppositions in forms of questions, whatever.
With a question mark?
Yeah, whatever it is. But we would just love to hear from you. You can send that our way at rabbittrail@obcc.church. That's rabbittrail@obcc.church. But remembering next week, we are talking about the concept of unity. And that'll include church unity. Well, what does that mean? And maybe you've got some questions that are going to come out of that. Again, feel free to send them our direction.
And maybe they come out of, the unity about your marriage as well. So, we look forward to questions and addressing them next week. One of the things I just want to remind everybody as we sign off is, the conversations we had today about men, leadership of the family and everything else, this is just between me and us and you. Please don't talk to our wives to try to confirm anything that we have said or...
All right, so man, you know how to really like train wreck the ending.
I know,
It's awesome.
Train wreck everything.
So no, I'm just...
So
But
we're going to leave.
But also, I mean, some people start asking when we're going to do live again. So are we going to do a live one again?
Well, I think
you
we
guys are
should
the
do
ones
one
that-
this summer for sure, you know. And so probably, I don't know. What do you think would be a good time?
Yeah. Well,
July, I know won't be
Well,
very good
ask them.
because
Yeah.
I'm going to be gone much of July. But August, June, whatever would that be? Maybe September.
well, I mean, just let us know if you're interested in actually us
Attending a
having a
live
live event and you would like to attend that. Let us know. We would love to hear from you. You can leave a comment, or if you can even just email us at rabbittrail@obcc.church. We'd love to hear from you guys. But have a great rest of your week, and may God bless you all.
Boom, chakalaka.
Bye.